first, let's get to your charts and walk us through the state of the economy as you see it, as opposed to how Donald Trump sees it.
Sure. We're going to hear a lot, I'm sure, this week from Donald Trump about how great it was before the virus and how great it has been, will be after the virus passes. But that's not really what the evidence shows. So let's start with the earlier period, which is his first 3 years in office. And obviously, jobs are probably the thing that's most on the minds of Americans. And so we can see here that on the gray side of that chart is Obama's period, where he created 224,000 jobs a month during his last 3 years, so a comparable period to Donald Trump. Donald Trump created 182,000 jobs during that same 3-year or his 3-year period. And what's the net of all that? The net of all that is that there are 1.5 million fewer jobs created under Trump than under Obama during the same 3-year periods, last 3 years of Obama, first 3 years of Trump. If you want to talk about economic growth, you can also see a mixed picture. Trump's claims he had the greatest economy ever. He was actually 7th out of his 11 predecessors in terms of GDP growth. GDP growth was very similar to what it was under Obama over these periods. And in fact, under Trump, GDP growth fell each year during his 3 years. So that was before the virus. Now let's talk about the virus. Trump told us we were going to have a V-shaped recovery. We were going to bounce back almost instantly. And that's not quite what we're seeing out there. So this shows you the monthly job report that we get from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And you can see the massive drop-off in jobs during the shutdown. We all knew that that was happening, and it exists. And then you can see we started to recover, 2.7 million jobs in May, 4.8 million jobs in June. But then in July, the number of jobs created dropped off to 1.8 million, so a much slower recovery. And again, in the box there, you can see the scorecard. We lost 22.2 million jobs. We've regained 9.3 million jobs. And that's only 42% of what we lost, with the number of jobs being added each month slowing down. Now, the shutdown, the need to have to shut down again, I think, has taken a significant toll on the pace of the economic recovery. The economy has certainly bounced off the bottom. But if you look at this chart, just to take one example of what's going on out there, this is a chart of revenues received by small business. And you can see the bottom back in the spring. That happens to be right around the time that the stimulus packages were enacted. And you can see that spending to these small businesses rose steadily, sharply and steadily into July. That little bump in the middle is the 4th of July. But then it plateaued, and it's even turning down a little bit. So as we sit here today, small business revenue is down 19.1% relative to where it was at the beginning of the year. And again, we have other data to show similar factors. For example, foot traffic in stores, restaurant reservations, things like that, all paint a picture of an economy that is not in any V-shaped recovery, that is recovering slowly and has a very, very long way to go to get back to where it was even as early as the beginning of this year.
I remember Scott Gottlieb on our show earlier, probably in April, saying we really needed a downturn in the summer to rest and prepare for the fall. Certainly businesses needed that badly because so many small business owners are suffering, and working class Americans are really taking a disproportionate hit here, even though Apple stock may be going up. It's certainly, there is such a disconnect between Wall Street and Main Street right now, perhaps as great as it's ever been. David Ignatius is with us, Steve, and has the next question. David.
Steve, your charts are a reality check, as always. I want to ask you, following on what Joe was saying about the hidden dimension of what's going on, and that's the danger that the inequality in the distribution of income and wealth in the United States, already a big problem, arguably part of the reason that Donald Trump has such strong support, angry people who feel they were left out. Is that going to get worse as we go deeper into this pandemic-caused recession and partial recovery?
David, yes, there's no question that what we are going through right now, purely on economic terms, has exacerbated all the problems we have of income inequality, of people toward the bottom not doing well. If you look at if you look at job loss figures during this recovery, so-called recovery, it has been way disproportionately focused on people with college degrees at the upper end, have lost the fewest number of jobs whereas people at the bottom, people without a high school diploma even, have lost the most number of jobs. You can see it. The industries that are most affected, just think about it this way, for example, things like travel, hospitality, restaurants, all of those have many, many workers at the lower end of the wage scale who have lost their jobs, and who knows when or if they're going to come back. So your question is right on. This so-called recovery is definitely having disproportionate impacts on different people, and unfortunately the worst impacts on people of color, women, people toward the lower end of the income scale.
And Steve, following up on David's question, one of my concerns also has to do with the fact that the stock market may be going up because Apple stock is going up and Facebook is going up and Microsoft and other companies like that, Amazon, are going up. But you also have some companies going up on the promise that post-pandemic, they're going to be able to continue to downsize as far as employees go. It reminds me of what Richard Haass said, that this pandemic is not going to bend history. It's not going to change history. It's going to accelerate history. And I fear that we've seen it halfway through the pandemic, that millions of jobs that have gone away in this pandemic probably aren't coming back because major corporations have figured out how to get by with less and making more money on Wall Street because they're cutting to the bone.
Joe, that's absolutely right. Every conversation I have with a CEO or a business person, an investment person in the course of our work, I hear the same thing. I hear CEOs saying, I don't need the same. I've learned from this pandemic that I don't need the same number of people when I come back as I had before. I've heard a lot from CEOs about cutting back on capital expenditures, which, of course, then also means not bringing people back to actually go ahead with those projects. And so, yes, there's no doubt that business is going to use this as a moment to rethink their cost structures, the number of employees they have. And, of course, we also don't know if that last 10 or 20% of the economy is going to come back anytime soon. When are theaters going to open? When are sporting events going to allow spectators? When are people really going to start traveling, either for business or pleasure, the way they did before? And so, yes, all of this, I think, is going to have a long-term effect on employment, and we're going to see high unemployment for a good while, several years at least, ahead of us.
All right, Steve Rattner, sobering news, but thank you so much for being with us. And what Steve said about hearing from CEOs, I've heard the same thing. They're talking about cutting back. This pandemic has shown them they can get by with fewer workers, with fewer capital expenditures. And this income disparity that we had was the economic crisis of our time, even before the pandemic. Whoever wins this November is going to be dealing with this. In fact, we're going to be dealing with this as a country for the next 20 years.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.